Addiction is a destructive and insidious condition that can devastate not only an individual's life but also deeply affect everyone around them. Like any disease, it demands prompt intervention from a qualified professional before it becomes too late. The case of 18-year-old Pamela Mastropietro, which took place in Italy in 2018, stunned the nation with its unthinkable brutality. It nearly sparked widespread unrest, including targeted violence against black migrants. Several innocent people were attacked solely because of their ethnicity, and only by chance were further tragedies prevented. Pamela was born on August 23, 1999 in Rome, Italy, the only child of Alessandra Vir and Stefano Mastropietro. She was raised in a comfortable, educated household. Her parents ran a successful business and did everything they could to provide their cherished daughter with the best possible life. Despite their demanding schedules limiting the time they spent with her, certain unusual aspects of Pamela's behavior began to emerge early on. She was intensely shy, withdrawn, and avoided social interaction. Her parents did not view these traits as worrisome, believing she would outgrow them once she began school and formed relationships with children her own age. However, as Pamela got older, these difficulties became more evident. Throughout her school years, she struggled deeply with socialization and found it hard to make friends. Teachers described her as intelligent and capable, but lacking confidence. She suffered from intense anxiety, sleep problems, and multiple fears, prompting her parents to consult a specialist. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Pamela often placed her trust in the wrong people, struggled to recognize danger around her, and appeared to have little sense of self-preservation. As she grew older, her mental health difficulties became more and more evident. At the age of 11, her family went through a serious crisis, with Alessandra and Stefano close to divorce. The upheaval had a profound impact on Pamela and led to a diagnosis of depression. Although her parents eventually reconciled and saved their marriage, Pamela's condition did not improve. 2 years later, she was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Yet, she continued attending regular school, despite ongoing social difficulties, in order to keep up with her studies. Pamela depended heavily on prescribed medication, which her mother carefully supervised. Alessandra clung to the hope that her daughter might eventually outgrow her mental health struggles. But Pamela's academic performance steadily declined and her behavior grew increasingly erratic and unpredictable. She developed into a striking young woman with a model-like figure and captivating features. By her teenage years, she began drawing attention from young men, yet had no idea how to manage their interest. Her trusting and naive nature remained, leaving her vulnerable to manipulation and dubious invitations. This eventually led her into a dangerous social circle. Pamela's lack of confidence and suggestibility made her inclined toward experimentation. She was introduced to alcohol and later to two illicit substances at a young age. Her ongoing mental health issues often impaired her judgment, making her Especially vulnerable in her relationships. Her psychiatrist later testified in court that Pamela was often unable to fully comprehend her actions or give informed consent, leaving her vulnerable to exploitation while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. During these periods, Pamela felt more confident, carefree, and happy. But the brief sense of relief soon developed into a serious dependency. At just 15, she was admitted to a private rehabilitation facility where her parents hoped she could overcome her escalating addiction. The treatment initially proved effective, and a few months later, she returned to school, appearing free from her former dependencies. She managed to sustain this progress for more than a year until, at 17, she met a 20-year-old Romanian man named Claudio. He quickly gained her trust and they began a relationship. Under his influence, Pamela relapsed into substance use, dropped out of her studies, and started running away from home. Her dependencies not only returned, but escalated dramatically. Claudio eventually persuaded her to take part in dangerous activities, including exploiting her own body to finance their increasing substance use. When the Master Trust became aware of Pamela's situation, they alerted the police. Claudio attempted to flee but was quickly found and arrested. He was later sentenced to 4 years in prison for encouraging a minor to consume alcohol and powerful substances, as well as for coercing her into illegal activities. In mid-October 2017, Pamela's parents decided to enroll her in another rehabilitation clinic. This time they chose to move her completely away from Rome, hoping to cut her off from the people and environments that had fueled her addiction. To do so, Alessandra and Stefano selected a treatment center in the small town of Mata. The program was extremely expensive, but her parents were willing to pay any cost. Determined to give Pamela every possible chance at recovery, the treatment plan was designed to last 3 months and included individual and group therapy with psychologists along with care from addiction specialists. After completing the program, Pamela was expected to return to a stable, substance-free life. The Mastropietro believed the clinic's high cost would guarantee constant supervision and protect their daughter from any access to harmful substances. However, the clinic staff and security failed to uphold their responsibilities. Patients were frequently able to leave the premises without restriction, break curfews, obtain prohibited substances, and engage in risky behavior. At first, Pamela appeared to be improving and remained at the clinic for about 2 months. She said she felt much better as the support and sense of community among others facing similar struggles gave her renewed hope. However, that same community combined with a lack of proper supervision ultimately worked against her. By early January 2018, as her rehabilitation program was nearing completion, Pamela began leaving the clinic to obtain and use substances. Again, without any intervention from the staff. The dependency she had fought so hard to overcome returned with renewed force. Alarmingly, her treating physician failed to recognize the relapse, setting the stage for a tragic chain of events. On January 29, 2018. Pamela's parents received a call from the rehabilitation center informing them that their daughter was missing and had allegedly escaped the facility. A closer look, however, revealed a very different reality. An inspection of her room and security camera footage showed that Pamela had calmly packed her belongings into a suitcase and walked out through the main entrance. No one at the clinic stopped her or even asked where she was going. Fellow patients later disclosed that Pamela had recently begun using substances more frequently, buying them from dealers outside the facility. She had also talked about wanting to leave what she considered ineffective treatment and return to Rome. That was likely her intended destination when she left the clinic, but she never boarded a train, did not return home, and was not seen or heard from by anyone she knew afterward. Naturally, Alessandra and Stefano were devastated and determined not to let their daughter's disappearance remain unresolved. They filed a missing persons report with the police and sought help from the media. The couple appeared on a local television station, appealing to the public for any information that might lead to Pamela's whereabouts. They also offered a substantial reward for any credible information. But for the first 2 days, no significant updates surfaced. On January 31st, a distressed man contacted the police, reporting that 2 suspicious suitcases giving off a foul odor had been dumped in a ditch near his home. Concerned they might contain something dangerous, he had not touched or opened them. The man lived in a suburban area of Mata, just a few miles from the rehabilitation center where Pamela had disappeared days earlier. Law enforcement accompanied by bomb disposal experts arrived at the scene, cordoned off the area, and carefully examined the suitcases to ensure they contained no explosives. Once deemed safe, the suitcases were opened, revealing a discovery that shocked even experienced investigators. The dismembered remains of a young woman had been packed inside, soaked in a corrosive chemical solution. Police immediately suspected the remains were Pamela's, but definitive confirmation required further testing. They showed the suitcases to her parents, who identified one as belonging to their daughter. Tragically, due to the severe damage and disfigurement, Pamela's body could only be officially identified through DNA testing, and determining the cause of death proved difficult. To make matters worse, the perpetrator had soaked the body parts in a bleach-like chemical, likely to destroy any trace of DNA. This treatment produced the horrid smell of decomposing tissue mixed with strong cleaning agents that initially drew attention to the suitcases. Investigators then focused on tracing Pamela's movements after she left the rehabilitation center. Street camera footage showed her walking toward a nearby public transportation stop where she appeared to be signaling passing vehicles. About 15 minutes later, a taxi pulled over. Pamela exchanged a few words with the driver before getting into the car. The trail went cold once the taxi left the range of the street cameras, but investigators were able to identify the vehicle's license plate. The driver was located soon after, and upon seeing Pamela's photo, he immediately recognized her. His account added a new dimension to the investigation. According to the driver, a young woman carrying a suitcase had approached him at the bus stop that evening, asking for a ride to the train station. She planned to travel to Rome, but the train had already left, so she intended to spend the night at the station, waiting for the next one. The driver admitted that he offered to take her to his home instead. And to his surprise, she agreed without hesitation. He stated that they engaged in intimate relations, claiming it was entirely consensual. The following morning, Pamela reportedly felt unwell and asked to be dropped off at a small park rather than returning to the station. The driver suspected she was experiencing withdrawal symptoms. The park she requested was known locally as a hot spot for obtaining illegal substances from undocumented migrants. However, he decided it was not his concern and left her at the location she asked for. He claimed that was the last time he saw her. The driver's story and alibi were quickly verified. He had indeed dropped Pamela off at the park before resuming his work. While he was cleared of any involvement in the crime, Pamela's parents later tried to hold him responsible for what they considered an exploitative encounter, arguing that their daughter's condition made her incapable of giving informed consent. However, the court ruled in the driver's favor, acquitting him of all charges. In the park, Pamela came into contact with a man named Desmond, a Nigerian national, involved in selling drugs. Desmond was a familiar figure in certain circles and had been on law enforcement's radar. Thanks to police informants, he was quickly identified and arrested on suspicion of involvement in Pamela's death. During questioning, Desmond admitted to selling Pamela a dose of an illegal substance for which she had paid with a necklace. He insisted, however, that after the exchange, she left and that he had no part in her death. Although his account was confirmed, Desmond remained in custody due to outstanding charges for distributing drugs and residing in Italy without documentation. Authorities did not dismiss the possibility of his involvement in the crime or in concealing evidence. About 15 minutes after Pamela purchased the substance, security footage showed her entering a nearby pharmacy. She bought a single-use syringe and left shortly afterward. The footage also captured another man entering and exiting the pharmacy around the same time. He appeared to keep his distance, but seemed familiar with Pamela. He was later identified as Innocent Osa Gale, a 30-year-old undocumented immigrant from Nigeria, also involved in drug sales. Innocent quickly became a key suspect in the investigation into Pamela's death. Law enforcement obtained his address from Desmond, who had been offered a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Innocent Osa Gale lived in a troubled neighborhood just a few blocks from the park where Pamela was last seen. Investigators suspected that she might have gone to his home to use the substances she had purchased. A police unit was dispatched to the address, but no one was home. However, authorities already had the necessary warrants to search the premises, which they suspected could be the site of a Serious crime. During the search, officers discovered multiple blood stains that appeared to have been poorly cleaned. They also found women's clothing matching the description of what Pamela had been wearing. Testing confirmed the blood belonged to Pamela, and her parents identified the clothing as hers, recognizing it from the suitcase where her remains had been found. In the bathroom, investigators found additional blood stains and 4 empty bottles of chlorine bleach, leaving no doubt that the crime had occurred there. Forensic specialists theorized that Innocent had lured Pamela to his home, where they used substances together. He may have then subjected her to sexual aggression and ultimately decided to end her life. The dismemberment and bleaching of her remains were likely attempts to destroy his DNA. Nearby, surveillance cameras captured Innocent approaching the ditch where the suitcases containing Pamela's remains were later found. However, he was not alone. Footage showed him arriving in a car driven by another man, with a third person in the vehicle, suggesting multiple individuals may have been involved in disposing of the evidence. The car was soon traced to a friend of Desmond's, a man named Lucky of Alamo, who was arrested the same day. Investigators determined that Lucky had been driving the vehicle used to transport the suitcases along with Lucky and Innocent. Desmond was also in the car, though he initially tried to deny involvement. Confronted with evidence, both accomplices revealed the suspected location of Innocent, but claimed they had no knowledge of what was inside the suitcases. They insisted they were merely helping Innocent dispose of what he described as trash. Innocent was arrested on February 2, 2018. As expected, he denied any wrongdoing and offered a strange and implausible account of events. He claimed that he had met Pamela in the park after she purchased substances and was looking for a secluded place to use them. He said he invited her to his home and she agreed. On their way there, Pamela and Innocence stopped at a pharmacy where she purchased a syringe. Once at his apartment, Pamela took the first dose, but complained that it didn't have the desired effect. She asked for more, but had no money left and allegedly offered to pay Innocent with physical intimacy. He agreed. After the second dose, they were intimate, but shortly afterward, Pamela began gasping for air. She went into convulsions and lost consciousness within minutes, showing no signs of life. Innocent claimed that Pamela had died from an overdose. Panicked and fearing that he would be held fully responsible, he decided to dispose of her body. He explained that cutting it into parts, placing it in suitcases, and discarding them outside the city seemed like the best course of action at the time. He used chemicals in an attempt to destroy his DNA, believing no one would believe that their intimacy had been consensual and initiated by her as payment for the substances. When questioned about the involvement of his associates, Lucky and Desmond, Innocent changed his story. He claimed they had arrived at his apartment shortly after he and Pamela had taken the substances. He said he passed out, and when he woke up, his friends told him Pamela was dead. They allegedly suggested disposing of her remains by dismembering them and packing them into suitcases. Verifying Innocent statements proved difficult, as he had destroyed much of the evidence. However, investigators soon uncovered a critical detail he had overlooked: the victim's hands. Forensic experts found traces of his skin cells under Pamela's nails, showing that she had fought back and scratched her attacker. As for Desmond and Lucky, they denied being at Innocent's apartment during the crime. Both provided alibis connected to their involvement in the illicit drug trade, believing that such confessions might result in lighter sentences compared to being charged with assault or participation in a violent crime. Their alibis were corroborated. However, questions remained about what they knew regarding the gruesome contents of the suitcases they had helped transport. While all three suspects remained in custody, forensic teams continued examining Pamela's remains to determine the cause of death. Toxicology reports showed high levels of prohibited substances in her system, but the amounts were not lethal and unlikely to have caused her death. Further examination revealed 2 penetrating wounds on her right side inflicted while she was still alive. Her liver had suffered severe damage, and it was clear that she had died from these injuries due to significant blood loss. The dismemberment took place several hours after her death. During later interrogations, Desmond and Lucky admitted that Innocent had spoken to them about a woman whose incapacitated state he had taken advantage of while she was unconscious from substance use. They believed this woman was Pamela, but claimed they had no knowledge of what happened to her afterward. For over 6 months, the investigation into Pamela's death made little progress. Authorities lacked enough evidence to bring the case to trial, even as Innocent Ostgaard remained the prime suspect. In a bold move, investigators placed an informant in his cell to gain his trust and extract a confession. The strategy succeeded. Innocent befriended his cellmate and eventually admitted that he had noticed an attractive young woman behaving strangely in the park. According to him, she was so trusting that she agreed to go to his home and accepted substances from him without questioning what they were. When she became unconscious, Innocent decided to exploit her vulnerability, seeing it as payment for the dose since she had no money. However, Pamela regained consciousness, began to resist, scratched him, and threatened to call the police. This enraged Innocent, who grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the liver. Moments later, Pamela went still and appeared to stop breathing. Assuming she was dead, he quickly devised a plan to dispose of her body in a suitcase. When he realized the body wouldn't fit, he decided to dismember it, starting with her limbs. Pamela unexpectedly regained consciousness, screaming and crying for help. Panicking, he stabbed her again in the liver, this time delivering a fatal wound. The informant recorded Innocent's confession, making it a crucial piece of evidence. The informant later served as a key witness during the trial. Additionally, Lucky Avellino came forward, revealing that Innocent had called him, presumably during the attack, asking for help. Disposing of trash. Lucky admitted he heard faint cries in the background, but dismissed them as noise from the television. The trial of innocent OSA Gail Desmond and Lucky of Alamo began in the spring of 2019. By that time, prosecutors had gathered substantial evidence proving innocent's guilt. Toxicology reports confirmed that Pamela had not died from a drug overdose, as innocent had claimed. The actual cause of death was 2 deep stab wounds to her liver, which caused fatal blood loss. Furthermore, forensic evidence showed that the dismemberment began while Pamela was still alive. In May 2019, innocent OSA Gail was convicted of committing non-consensual intimate acts against Pamela, who was vulnerable due to her mental health and substance use. He was also found guilty of violent assault, desecration of her body, and attempting to destroy evidence. Innocent was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and all his appeals were denied. The case sparked widespread outrage in Italy and beyond, reigniting debates on immigration, criminal justice, and protections for vulnerable individuals. Innocence actions combined with his undocumented status fueled public discussion about the responsibilities of host nations in managing migrant populations and addressing systemic failures that allowed such crimes to occur. There was no direct evidence linking Desmond or Lucky to the violent crime, so they were not considered active accomplices. However, the court concluded that they likely knew what was in the suitcases and understood why innocent OSA Gail had asked them to transport and dispose of them in a ditch outside the city. Despite this, they were only convicted of distributing illegal substances and were each sentenced to 5 years in prison. The case of Pamela Mastropietro received extensive media coverage and sparked widespread public outrage directed at black migrants. In one particularly shocking incident, an Italian man named Luca Trini armed himself with a handgun and began shooting at a bus carrying African passengers. 6 innocent people were injured, and it was only by sheer luck that no lives were lost. Trini was arrested and admitted that his actions were meant as revenge, though he denied any guilt. He was later convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.